Hello, everyone. This is Nayiri from Low Carbon Fasting. Well, today's episode is part of the series called Type 1 Diabetics Talk on my channel, where both host, myself, and guests are type 1s. And yes, you guessed it, we talk about type 1 diabetes and related topics. So today's guests are fellow type 1s, and today's discussion is going to revolve around partly the ketogenic diet for type 1 diabetes, but more importantly, fasting, both extended and intermittent fasting. So please meet my guests, Karen Hall and Michael Fitzpatrick. Welcome to Low Carbon Fasting.
Thanks so much.
Good morning. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Karen and Michael, first of all, I would like you to introduce yourselves to our audience, and perhaps just a brief introduction about, who you are, where are you from, and what you do in life.
Sure. Karen, you go ahead.
Okay. I live in Arkansas, Central Arkansas, a very small town called Bald Knob. And I'm married here. I work full-time. I have a stepson. And I was diagnosed type 1 diabetes at about 18, 19 years old. So I've had it going on 24, 25 years now. And, sometimes I was better at low carb than others, but last year I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I really didn't want to do conventional chemo and all of that stuff. So I was looking for alternatives. And I learned about fasting to reduce symptoms of chemotherapy. And so that is why I started fasting. That was my introduction to fasting. And I hardcore started keto then, and I've been doing pretty well. I've only had it like one cheat day, and it was horrible on blood sugar. So now maybe I have a cheat meal and a bite here and there, but no more days. Too much.
Thank you, Karen. Michael?
Yeah, my name's Mike Fitzpatrick. I live in Maryland. I've had type 1 diabetes for 25 years. And my kind of claim to fame is I've lost about 160 pounds over the last 2 years since November 2020. It's March 2023 right now. And I did that through initially a lot of extended fasting and eating a very low carb, high protein diet.
Right. I think I'm the veteran type 1 here. 45 years for me. So yes. 45 years. I started low carb in 2015. So 8 years now. And I started extended fasting about 2 years ago, in 2020, actually, maybe 3 years ago. But I've been doing intermittent fasting for a very long time. And when I say intermittent fasting, even now that half the world at least seems to have heard about intermittent fasting and the benefits of it, when I seem to mention it, all I get is, "Ooh, you're type 1. You shouldn't be doing that." Well, I started intermittent fasting literally in the year 2000. So I always joke to my friends that the last time I had a morning meal was in the year 1999. And it's true. Because I used to wake up with feeling like nauseous in the mornings. The last time blood sugars were probably high. These were pre-CGM days. And I wouldn't check in the mornings. And my blood sugars were probably high on top of dawn phenomenon and foot on the floor phenomenon and all the rest. The last thing I would fancy would be eating something. So I decided not to take my bolus insulin in the mornings and not to eat. And when I mentioned it to my doctor at the time, she said, no, that's extremely dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't listen. I'm very glad I didn't listen. So intermittent fasting is like, it comes so naturally to me. So do you both do intermittent fasting, Karen? Are you still doing intermittent fasting, or do you, or if you want to call it time restricted eating?
Yes, I would say I'm very similar to you. If my blood sugar was high or something, I didn't feel like eating breakfast. Most of the time, I didn't eat breakfast. Maybe on the weekend, I'd have one. But usually I'd start my eating about noon. Now I generally try to just eat lunch and supper, or one or the other. And that's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that makes one meal a day does a little better. But 2 meals a day sometimes is more psychologically appealing.
Well, socially as well, I think it makes
Yes.
sense. Sometimes when 2 meals are required, I can very, very happily have 2 meals. The reason I avoid the 2 meals is because the second one will be, because like you mentioned, Michael, my meals are heavy in protein, and the blood sugar rise after protein could take up to 8 hours. So if I have a later meal in the day, protein-based meal, I'm going to have higher blood sugars in the middle of the night. I'm not wearing a Dexcom. I wear the Libre Freestyle Libre sensor. It does alarm, but the alarms are very erratic. So I can't rely on the alarm to wake me up. Sometimes I literally like wake up completely in sweat and overheated, and I scan myself and I'm running like 250 or something, which is extremely unusual. The reason I don't have a second meal is to avoid that late rise.
Yes. Yeah. I do that sometimes when I'm having trouble with overnight highs. It's especially helpful to stop eating, before 2 or 3.
Exactly. That's what I do. 3 is the latest for me, is the cutoff point. Yeah. But if I have to, I'm at a social event, I'll nibble at a few sort of low carbohydrate sort of foods, and it won't hurt. Michael, 1 meal, 2 meals, intermittent fasting?
Yeah, these days I do intermittent fasting, but it's funny what you said earlier about your doctor not being supportive. That's extended fasting can be extremely dangerous for type 1 diabetics, and medical professionals, they really don't understand how to implement that for type 1s, and type 1s that don't take the initiative to learn how to scale back their bolus and basal insulins, and especially those type 1s that continue to eat the standard Western or American diet that's very high in processed grains and sugars. When they eat again, they'll continue on the roller coaster blood sugar. So it's extremely important, in my view, if you're a type 1 diabetic and you want to go on to the extended fasting or intermittent fasting for whatever reason, it's important to also match your diet to a low carb lifestyle, so that you can also get your ketones up and kind of thrive that way. Personally speaking, I started my journey doing extended fasting. I would do, my longest fast was 7 days, and that was a very good experience for me. It showed that I do have control over my body and my hunger, and it kind of reset my hunger signaling and my relationship with food. And then from that point on, I didn't do 7 days, but I did more 30-hour to like about 100-hour fast back to back. And I continued that on until I got to a weight range that I was comfortable with, to the weight range where I'm at today. Today I'm at about 225 pounds. I started at about 400 pounds or so, maybe 380. And then I decided, you know what, I actually lost a lot of muscle, and I looked kind of, weak. So I started lifting a lot of weights, and I upped my protein significantly, and I implemented kind of a intermittent fasting lifestyle where I wouldn't eat my first meal until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. and then I'd eat my last meal probably about 6 o'clock or so in the evening, both capped off with high protein meals. And I just eat as much protein as I possibly can. If there's days that I can't get to my protein goal, then I'll supplement with whey protein shakes. But that's been very successful for me. I've done a significant body recomposition. I can see my abs for the first time in my life, which is great. And I'm continuing on with this lifestyle. And it shows that if you're type 1, you can do it. And it's very useful to help manage your blood sugars. I've maintained an A1C in the low 5s, between 5.0 to 5.3 for the past 2 years since I've implemented fasting. And that's down from the low 6s before I did that. And my blood sugars have been much more stable. I've eliminated the extreme hypos that I used to get all the time. Even with the 6.2, I used to have seizure hypos a lot. And those are completely gone. My dawn phenomenon, as Karen mentioned, is gone. I used to wake up regularly with blood sugars well over 200. These days, my blood sugars are perfect. It's about 820 right now in the morning, and my blood sugar is 88, if you can see that. And I've had nothing to eat, and that's how it is most mornings, and I feel great.
I was curious how the high protein later in the afternoon affected you, but it doesn't seem to.
Yeah, it's the high protein is, you do get have to bolus for protein, and there's a myth out there that type 1s don't have to bolus for protein, and that's a myth that needs to go away right now.
Yeah.
I do use our insulin. That's another thing that's not well known in the type 1 community. So I use my insulin pump. I use the tandem pump for my basal and for high corrections, and then I use our insulin to cover protein meals. So
yeah, I think with our insulin, you can have that late night meal because our insulin is a rapid acting. So for type 1s who are from Europe, perhaps you would have heard about NovoRapid is the most common one. I put NovoRapid, which is quick acting, in my insulin pump because in the UK currently I don't have access to our insulin, which is quite sad, but I don't have access to our insulin. And so I have to learn how to manage my bolus for protein with rapid acting. And it's quite a challenge. It's horrible because I literally have to monitor my blood sugars, and manage them after I've eaten for good 8 hours with intermittent boluses, like micro doses of boluses.
Oh, Nayiri, you cut out a little bit, but yeah, go ahead.
So I was just saying, I have to learn how to manage my insulin for the protein using rapid acting insulin, because that's the only one available to me at the moment. And so I have to find out how to do it. So the only way to do it is to monitor my blood sugars after a protein heavy meal for 8 hours, but very, very closely, and perhaps intermittently at every hour, take micro doses of rapid acting. Rapid acting has that crashing effect. So you don't want large doses of rapid acting, whereas our insulin, you just take one bolus and you're done. It just works more slowly, whereas rapid acting works quickly. Within 20 minutes, you find yourself dropping too low. And so I literally have to micromanage. And this is why I don't want to deal with it at nighttime, because it would be impossible for me. But I'm very happy for you, Michael, that you have access to a regular insulin.
Yep.
What kind of insulin do you use, Karen?
I'm thinking I need to get some of that R. I've been using Humalog for fast acting.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you can hear me. Sorry. If you hear my son, he's in the background. He's 3 years old. He just woke up. So be quiet. The great thing about R, Karen, is that it's available without a prescription at any Walmart, anywhere. The first time I did R, I was kind of suspicious and apprehensive, but it was very easy. I just showed up to the Walmart pharmacy. I said, please give me, 3 vials of R insulin. It was $25 a pop. They also gave me a package of, you can get insulin needles over the counter without a prescription too.
Mhm.
And it was so easy, and it's only $25, so much cheaper than the Novolog. And if you're going to eat a high protein meal, I highly suggest that you or any other type 1 check that out. So
I'll have to do that. I thought that that's actually what I started out with.
yep, same
Was
with me.
our insulin in 70/30, 25 years ago.
Yep.
And I was told these are supposed to be better insulins, but I didn't.
They're better.
I guess I
insulin.
haven't heard.
Yep. So they say that the rapid acting insulin, they push that so much, not only because there's such a high markup, but it's also developed so that people can continue eating the standard American diet and the processed junk. But in reality, it's impossible to match the high peaks of, eating a cupcake or a donut with the high peaks of the insulin. It's physically impossible to match the two. With eating the protein, it's a slow rise and a slow fall, and the R, it also matches that action time. It's a slow rise and slow fall. So if you are if you're off by a little bit, it's really easy to correct with a small correction, or 1 or 2 glucose tablets, instead of having a emergency double arrow down hypoglycemia. So that's another advantage of the R insulin. I was going to say, while Nayiri was reconnecting with her computer, her connection, it can be done with insulin pumps if you do extended square wave boluses. So before I went to R, I would do a small bolus up front, and then I do a 2-hour bolus at the end, but then I'd have to do another extended bolus at the end of that. So that was kind of a pain. So I found that R is much easier to manage with the high protein. So
that's so right, because I have the extended bolus option, and in fact mine extends over 8 hours. So I don't know if you're a pump user, Karen, but basically you take your bolus rather than in one big dose. You can split it into tinier doses over a period of up to 6 or 8 hours, and my pump can go up to 8 hours. But I found that even then, blood sugar rise and that tiny doses of rapid acting insulin wouldn't match. It was impossible to match. And so I do it manually now. It's hard work. It's doable. It's not impossible, and I can't complain. I mean, I'm grateful. I have all the tools I need. I have an insulin pump. I have a CGM. I'm grateful for it all, because there are a lot of type 1 diabetics in the world, and some of them might be watching this. In fact, some people in my audience can't access insulin. They don't have the tools. They don't have a CGM. So it's tough for a lot of type 1 diabetics. So I'm grateful I have access to rapid insulin, but it's hard work. It's hard work to dose for protein. I'm constantly like scanning myself every 20 minutes and seeing which way I'm heading, and then how much more rapid acting I need. And it's tiny doses of rapid acting I'm bolusing myself with. So I'm constantly sort of chasing, but it works for me because it's a lot better than taking or having to take a high dose of rapid acting for a large portion rather of carbohydrates, because then you're definitely going to crash. I mean, this way, if I'm taking, I don't know, 0.30 units. I mean, it's a tiny dose, right? 0.30 at a time, or 0.50 or half a unit. So it's tiny doses. So you avoid, going too high, but you also avoid crashing badly. So do you use a pump, Karen?
I have in the past, but a few years ago I stopped and went back to multiple daily injections because it was a little less expensive with my insurance coverage. But I agree that lower doses of insulin are much easier. And just eating low carb, when I got a CGM last year, the Dexcom, because I had met my deductible, and and it's, when I eat keto, it's like straight lines, almost almost flat, just a little rise. And then if I throw some carbohydrates in there, like it just goes crazy. So it's so much better. And that is a really nice tool to use. The Libre, Freestyle Libre is pretty inexpensive in the US. To try it out for a month or something, just so you can see how your blood sugar does versus, testing your blood. You can actually see. And that is doing that for, several times kind of trains me to not, worry about what my blood sugar is doing too often when I have to prick my finger to check it. But just to know that it's not going to be rising real fast. It's not going to be lowering real fast. It's just it's so much nicer than chasing highs and eating something for a low and then
It's a lot different than what we're taught as type
yes.
1s in the hospital, especially when I was first diagnosed 25 years ago, and actually diabetics today, they're still told to eat, 3 meals a day with at least 45 to 60 grams of carbs coming from the healthy whole wheat breads or oatmeal or something like that, and 2 to 3 snacks with at least 15 grams of carbs. It's absolutely ridiculous. Diabetes is a disease that by definition we can't process glucose. And a lot of times if we go to our endos or our medical healthcare teams and we say, hey, I'd like to look at this low carb thing, even myself with my own experience, like, oh, even to this day, myself, my endo keeps saying, you need carbs. I highly recommend that you introduce more carbs in your diet. Like, you know what? No, just give me my prescription for my rapid acting insulin, my pump, and my CGM, and I'll just be on my way. Thank you very much. And it's because of the powerful anecdotal stories, and thanks a lot in big part to social media. That's how I personally found low carb to help manage my type 1 diabetes, and thank goodness I did. We really don't get that kind of help from our healthcare teams, and it's a damn shame. A lot of people are really suffering. And if you look at the data from the type 1 diabetes exchange registry, you'll see that the average A1Cs for type 1 diabetics in the US, let alone worldwide, it's like 8%. People are struggling to get below 8%. And the data out there shows that you will get long-term complications. You will get long-term complications even if you're in the 5s. So people should be striving for under 5% A1Cs, and the targets that are set for us are, get below 7%, and that's fine. You get a pat on the head and a boot out the door from your endo team. But you're not told that cardiovascular risk goes up significantly even if you're at like a 5.3% A1C. So it's really I feel strongly that the message needs to go out that type 1 diabetics can achieve normal non-diabetic blood sugars, and we can avoid the long-term complications that come with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. And to do that, you change your diet, you change your insulin regimen, and you know what? Fasting is a great way to implement those things. It's a great way to get your blood sugar down. It's a great way to lose weight. It's a great way to smooth out your blood sugars. So that's what I feel very strongly about.
Yeah, I share your sentiments, Michael. It's I'm glad you brought up the sort of lack of support from our physicians. I received no support from my physician. I had to figure it all out myself.
It's all anecdotal.
Thanks to social media, thanks to the internet, for all its vices, it did have a positive sort of influence on me, because I created a community on Facebook. I meet people like you, and it's wonderful to be able to share ideas. And I think one thing we need to remember is that no two people are alike. So what I do get frustrated about is when type 1 diabetics compare. Also, you're only taking 20 units, total units. Why am I on 25? Like, please, we're not the same.
Yes.
No two type 1s. I mean, you might require for a bowl of salad lettuce and cucumbers, for example. I'm not even adding tomatoes in there. Sorry, tomatoes, as you call them. I'm not even adding the carby tomatoes in there. Leave them out. But cucumber and, I don't know, lettuce salad. It might do nothing on my blood sugars, or it might have a very insignificant impact. And yet on you, Michael, or on Karen, it might have a completely different impact. So no two type 1 diabetics are the same. We have different requirements, and our microbiome is, different. So we should, this isn't, I always tell when I'm talking to other type 1s, this isn't a race who can fast the longest, who takes the least amount of insulin, or who can eat the least amount of carbs. Also, I'm very close to carnivore diet at the moment. I do have some vegetables every now and again, and I love that, and I'm happy with that. Doesn't mean everyone needs to follow that diet. We have to stop treating this as a competition. We're not in a race. We're in the same boat. We have to work together.
Yep, that's a great point, Nayiri. It's insulin is not the enemy. That comes up a lot in the ketogenic groups online, and especially type 1 ketogenic. Insulin is not the enemy in the context of a low carb diet. Insulin is part of the lipolysis, I think, cycle. But you need as much insulin as you need to get normal blood sugars if you're eating a low carb diet. Insulin is vital for breaking down protein and metabolizing protein into the appropriate amino acids. So you need insulin to build muscle. You need insulin to escape the catabolic state that your body will go into. It'll start digesting itself. You need insulin to make sure that you don't run high blood sugars. And a lot of time people are scared of insulin and the effects. But if you're eating the ancestrally appropriate, as some would say, diet, low carb, high protein, then insulin is key to building muscle and building health. So that's something that I myself went through. I would say, I want to get my insulin as low as possible. But then once I started eating a carnivore diet and started weight training, my insulin needs actually went up significantly. But at the same time, I was still losing body fat, and I get DEXA measurements every 6 months, and it showed that I would continue to lose body fat, and I would build significant amounts of muscle, even though my insulin levels were higher than what I was doing just doing walking around the block and doing a lot of extended fasting. So I think that's another very important message that type 1 diabetics and people generally that do fasting need to hear as well. So
yeah.
Now, message about insulin. Sorry, Karen. It's without insulin, we're not going to build muscle. And I was doing keto up until a few years ago, and I had been a vegetarian for 30 years. Been vegetarian for 30 years, and it was impossible for me to build muscle. I realized I was so fatigued. I'd wake up in the morning. Blood sugars were great. A1C was coming down in the diabetic range. So in that respect, I was doing really well, but I was skinny so skinny that I could, a tiny minor fall and I would like break in half. and I wasn't healthy. So clearly I wasn't healthy. So so I realized I had to change my diet. I also realized I had to start resistance training, because that's the only tool. You have to increase your protein, animal-based protein, and you have to do resistance training if you're going to build muscle and strength and bone density. So that's when I started, and I feel healthier now. And my insulin needs did go up, by the way, Michael. My insulin needs did go up when I started eating a sort of meat-heavy diet, but in context,
the goal is to lose fat, not to lose muscle. That's right.
Exactly. In the context of sort of resistance training and sort of protein meals, insulin is not your enemy. So I feel healthier now than I did 10 years ago, and stronger. Karen?
Yeah. I was just thinking about the insulin. usage in regards to fasting. I attempted a 7-day fast in January. This is March now. And I didn't lower my insulin enough at the beginning of that. So I had to eat some nuts to avoid too much low. But this week I did like a 2-day fast, and I went ahead and lowered it to like my long acting to 6 units. And that worked out really well. Like when you're going into it's a little bit of trial and error when you first begin, but you have to probably lower what you normally would take and then adjust, slowly your boluses to correct highs until you figure out, you get comfortable with it and how much you should take at a time without going too low later. Because as you reminded me that even the short acting lasts like 7 or 8 hours. And after you reminded me of that, I was like, oh yeah, it is still going down on fasting days, like for a long time. So just learning those things, and it's okay to have, a few nuts or a little bit of something if you need it, and then continue on trying your fast.
Yes.
And
it's
yeah.
extremely important to if you are type 1 and you are doing extended fasts, don't look at treating low blood sugars as eating food. You need to use glucose to treat your blood sugars and look at that as medicine. That was a big mental block for me when I was doing extended fast. I'd say, oh, I can just, muscle through these low blood sugars and not eat the glucose. But in the end, I was like, you know what, this is silly. I'm just gonna eat a couple of glucose tablets. It's not gonna ruin anything with my fast. So that was good that you chose to treat your low blood sugars, because in the end, that's the most important thing, is to make sure that we have the correct blood sugars. So
safety
Yeah.
of paramount importance. I mean, we want to promote fasting for type 1 diabetics who are interested in fasting for its numerous benefits, but safety is of paramount importance. I mean, you must have insulin ready. You must be prepared to adjust your insulin. In most cases, if not all cases, you're going to have to lower your insulin doses as you go along. And you must have, I've only got 2 left in this pack, but glucose tabs with you at all times. If you're leaving the house for 2 minutes, carry the glucose tabs with you, because you don't know when you're going to need them. So it's important that you stay safe when you're doing extended fasting. Do you find that on the second day of fasting, then you're going to sort of your body requires less basal insulin? Now, let's just make it clear to people who are not familiar with extended fasting and type 1 diabetes and the insulin intake. So we take 2 types of insulin. One is long-acting basal insulin. So in other words, it's your background insulin to keep you alive and functioning, right? And that's all you need if you're not eating. Now, when we're eating, we then have to take further bolus insulin to cover the food or the blood sugar rise that the food would contribute to. So, but if we're fasting, then we don't worry about the bolus insulin. So all we need to make sure is that our background insulin is keeping our blood sugars stable. To get that right, you're right, Karen. It's a trial and error thing. What works for you will not work for Michael. What works for Michael will not work for me. So we have to see what works. Experimentation is good as long as we're doing it safely. But we're all different, so there isn't one formula that works for everyone. So we need to figure out the right dose of that background insulin so that we're ideally, in the ideal world, we're staying stable all day long. Does it mean we're never going to have rises and lows? Well, we will. So whenever we have a rise, Michael, you said, we need to be prepared to take a small dose of insulin to correct that rise.
It was
a big glucose tab if we're too low. So
exactly. It was a big adjustment for me. Before I started fasting, I was taking about 200, you wouldn't believe it, 210 units of insulin a day. That's bolus and basal together. And when I start, and then in the throes of fasting, I got to under 20 units per day. That's per day. So 210 to under 20 per day. These days I'm at about 40 to 45 units. But during that time, I will tell you, I did have significant lows. And that's something that you really need to be on guard for. Because your bolus is going to be eliminated because you're not eating, and your basal is going to be significantly reduced. So I was lucky that when I started fasting, I just started using my tandem closed loop insulin pump, so it would help me automatically adjust my basal rates down. But boy, if I was doing MDI, that would have been a lot harder. And Karen, hats off to you for doing that with MDI. I don't think I could do that. That's very difficult. But that just goes to say, just be prepared for the unexpected. Always be prepared, as Nayiri says, with your glucose. Make sure that you have your glucagon shots, that your family knows how to do that just in case that happens. But once you learn how to fast safely, then it can be very therapeutic for you. So.
Yes. After I got over chemo and everything and started to learn more about fasting and keto for just good health for diabetics, especially, I heard about, the type 2, type 1, the secondary diabetes, secondary type 2 diabetes. And I'm sure that I was insulin resistant. I wasn't using 200 units a day, except when I accidentally injected myself with some one time. But the fasting really will help if I notice if I'm just going along eating keto even. Sometimes my blood sugar just seems to run high for no reason. And if I'll fast for a day or two, then it'll go back down into more normal levels, and it continues on at a better rate than it would have if I hadn't fasted. So that's been really helpful for the insulin sensitivity also.
That's good. Yeah. Karen, do you do, when you say ketogenic diet, what do you mean by ketogenic? Is that a high fat diet, or do you just mean just low carb?
I do high fat, low carb,
okay,
and maybe moderate protein. Ate a lot of cheese, meat. I love cabbage. Last night we had some roast, and I cooked some cabbage and butter and put the roast juice on there and a little bit of protein. And that was, that's a meal for me.
For dinner next time. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Me particularly. I learned. Sorry, Nayiri. Recently, I actually learned that fat, if you eat high fat, it doesn't really affect your blood sugars right away, but it does affect your basal rates over time. So if you eat a high fat meal when you go to bed, you will wake up in the morning with a lot higher blood sugars than you normally would. So that's just something interesting that I don't know if you or any of the viewers knew about, but
I can vouch for that because I learned that from personal experience as well. So when I was doing keto before starting to introduce meat, because, for a vegetarian of 30 years, that was the toughest thing I had to do because I didn't even know how to chew meat. That was a whole new experience. The whole experience was new. It's like weaning your baby off of breast milk or off of baby milk to solid foods. It's like the whole experience was new to me, and it was torture in the beginning. I've come a long way. I'm very proud of myself, but I noticed that when I wasn't eating sufficient protein, well, certainly not enough sort of animal-based protein, right? I was constantly hungry. So I'd lowered the carbs already. So I was making up for it by massive amounts of cheese, and there's nothing that tastes better in the world than cheese. In my opinion, it's better than candy and cake. Sorry, and we have access to all the European cheeses as well. So it's wonderful. I mean, it's heaven. So I had to eat something to to feel this, satiety. And if the protein wasn't high, or in fact it was non-existent, and so protein from cauliflower isn't the same as protein from, I don't know, your greens. I mean, they do contain certain amount of protein, but they're not the same. They're not complete proteins. So I was constantly hungry, so I was having to up my fat, and then I found myself going insulin resistant and more tired and muscle. I didn't have muscle either. So now my protein is the basis of my meal. The carbs are extremely low. If I eat them, obviously it'd be salads and cooked vegetables, low carbohydrate vegetables. And fat is something I have to moderate. So one day, if I have, I don't know, cream and peanut butter or something, the next day I have to withhold from it, because if I have cheese and nut butters or even nuts regularly for, I don't know, say 3 days, then I'll become insulin resistant for a good week. For a whole week, it takes my body a whole week to recover from it and go back to normal. My insulin needs go up significantly. So my basal just doesn't do the job anymore. And if that happens to fall at that certain time in the month, Karen, you'll relate to this, then forget it. I'm just saying, it's like my blood sugars are out of my control. I don't like not being in control of my blood sugars. And if I can control them somehow, you can't always control them, but if I can have some control, I would rather do that. So that's why I have to be careful with fats. Not that I don't eat fat, but I still enjoy the cheeses and the yogurts. I love that sort of thing. But I can't do it consistently. I have to, that's it. So yesterday, that was it, peanut butter, and for a whole week, I'm not touching it. I literally have to lock it away. I lock it away. I have to put it high up in the kitchen and lock it away, because it's so tempting, right? It's one of those things that you can't, that's not so easy to moderate. So
there's a great saying that I recently learned. It's carbs are a limit, right? Protein is a goal. So you're reaching for the protein, and fat is the lever, if you've ever heard that saying. So if you want to reduce weight, you reduce your fat as a lever. If you want to increase your weight, you increase the fat. So that's kind of a mindset. I used to be the high fat keto as well, but then I kind of saw the success that others were having with like a low carb, low fat, and it's been a game changer for me, because I had that that last like 20 pounds that I wanted to lose, and able to just get right through that. So that's something cool that I learned recently. So, and it helped with the blood sugar.
Yeah, I have a few more I probably need to lose, so maybe I should try that.
Yeah, there's a great book. I'll send it to you when we're done here, Karen, but there's a great book that I read that you'd like, by Marty Kendall, Nayiri. You're probably familiar with that book. So
I've interviewed Marty as well. I'll put the link in the description, so people can watch that interview. We did talk about type 1 diabetes, and we talked about fat as well. Marty's son and wife,
and his wife,
type 1 diabetics. So he understands type 1 diabetes really well. So we talked about reducing insulin for when we're fasting. So Karen, I mean, you can do it on MDI. These are the sort of multiple daily injections. You can do it. We in fact have a role model of a doctor here in the UK. He's very well known, low carb. In fact, he does keto. His name is Ian Lake, type 1 diabetic. So you might have come across his interviews on YouTube. So he's a great role model for us all. He doesn't use a pump. So, and he participated. In fact, he was the leader of a project where 8 people participated in a total fasted run over 5 days, totally fasted over 5 days. And 2 of those people, including himself, were type 1 diabetics, and they were getting checked all along, so ketone levels, glucose levels, blah, blah, blah. And the end result showed that there wasn't much difference between the type 1s and non-diabetics. So there wasn't any difference. In fact, even the non-diabetics during the run were dropping as low as like 60, 55, and they weren't even feeling, they were all keto adapted people, but they weren't feeling cognitive impairment. So it was a good trial to check out. Again, I'll put the link.
It was 20 miles per day, Nayiri. It was 100 miles total, 20 miles per day. Very, very impressive. He was one of the first interviews that I saw when I started Googling type 1 and fasting. And I saw that interview on Diet Doctor, and I was just blown away. So.
Yeah, and again, those type 1 diabetics were on MDI, so they were wearing pumps. You use the looping system, Michael. Now I don't have that, so I've never tried it. But what I do on my pump, and I love my pump for that. Sometimes it drives me crazy, but that feature is great because the background insulin, the basal insulin, you haven't taken it all in one, like 8 units, say, all in one go, or even a split.
That's a big advantage. Yep.
You're taking it hourly, just trickling tiny doses of insulin. So if I feel like I'm dropping too low and I want to avoid having to take glucose tablets, I suspend my pump. So I literally can put a stop to the basal insulin coming in. So for about good 2 hours, even 3 hours during an extended fast, I can totally stop basal insulin coming in, and then I start again. And that maintains steady blood sugar. Again, it's a trial and error. You have to see what works for you.
It's also good for exercise. I like to do a lot of endurance running too. So I'll kind of suspend it. I'll put it on exercise mode, which sets a higher target rate. So it'll suspend my basal, so I won't get low. So I used to get pretty bad lows when I did my 10K runs and stuff, but that seems to help too. So.
That is a big advantage of having a pump. Yes.
So how did you figure out how to lower your insulin, Michael, during the extended fast? So
it was trial and error.
To be that low, right? So that's why you were dropping low, because initially we're afraid to lower the insulin, think, okay, so I'm used to the 20, now I only need 6. It's like, surely that can't be right.
Yeah, it was trial and error. I was taking monster industrial doses of bolus insulin. I would take like 50 units, 50 units for a meal. And these days when I take a bolus, it's like 3 to 5 units of regular. And I thank goodness every day that I was able to lower my bolus, and my pump would automatically reduce my basal rates. So that's really how I did. So it was just trial and error, to be honest. If I could do it again, I would probably try to lower it quicker, faster. But that's just because I had some lows to start. But like I said, all of type 1 diabetes is an N=1 experiment to find out what works for you, because even if you eat the same meal 2 days in a row at the same time, you're going to get different results. So that's type 1 in a nutshell. Everything could be exactly the same, but there's one little thing that changes, and it could send your blood sugars high versus low. So that's the ball game that we play. So the key is to try to keep things as consistent as possible, and try to use the law of small numbers, if you've ever heard of that. Small doses of insulin make small errors, which are very easy to correct. So just doing that, that's kind of my mantra these days, and I've had good success with that. So
I agree.
Yeah, Michael, so your primary goal was weight loss, right?
Weight loss, yes.
And Karen, your primary goal was to help with your symptoms, the chemotherapy symptoms?
Yes, it was in the beginning. And now it's I did lose weight when I started eating keto. And I've kind of just maintained since that first initial weight loss, but there's a little bit more I probably need to lose. So that's one of and maintaining my weight loss. I don't want to gain weight back. So that's one of the reasons that I fast now, and also to continue, because maybe everybody who's watching this video would already know that, have found out that when you take insulin, like for years I was doing it to myself, when you eat carbohydrates as a non-diabetic person, your body's automatically given that insulin. You get insulin resistant, it gives more insulin. You're forcing your cells to take all of that sugar and put it somewhere, and eventually you're damaging cells. And so then you've got, and I don't know if anybody ever said, like, they said you shouldn't, but why? Like, if I don't have a why, I don't necessarily pay attention to good advice. But you shouldn't keep doing that to yourself because it's causing harm in your body. It can, when you damage those cells, then eventually they're more likely to become cancer. And so that is why diabetics have higher instances of cancer and heart disease and all of those things. So I want to maintain that good health for sure. And hopefully, and the fasting, the autophagy, aspect of it, like it really attracts me because I'm like, oh, if I don't eat, then my body's going to break down all these damaged cells in there, and it's going to get rid of them, and I will have less chance of any cancer coming back or all of those things. And I can't say, what's that?
You know what the primary fuel source for cancer is, right? Glucose.
Sugar.
Right?
Yeah. So, yes. And that was like what I was like, I'm not going to eat sugar. I had bought a cake mix to make for us before I found out I had cancer, and went through all of that. And my husband one day was like, will you make that cake for us? And I told him, I can't make it, but it makes me want to cry when I think about making sugar for you guys.
Well, Birch Benders has a great brand, so there's lots of low carb options out there. So
yeah.
Karen, where are you in terms of your cancer now? Where's your health?
I am officially cancer free. I guess I was after the surgery. When they removed it, they told me they did a blood test before my scans, and they're like, you're cancer free. And I was like, okay, so I still have to do the other stuff. So I can't say, that's why I wanted to do the fasting, because I was trying not to do chemo, and I was like, well, if I just stop all of this other stuff, is that good enough? But it just wasn't quite comfortable enough to do that. So I went ahead, Dr. Walter Longo, I believe, at USC has done the studies with mice, and they're doing some with humans, although he has a hard time with oncologists apparently telling patients not to eat because they're so big on nutrition. Keep your nutrition up. So listening to him was really what his experiments with mice showed, that mice who were not fasted, given the same chemotherapy regimen as mice with the fasting, the survival rate was much greater with the fasting. And so it can sensitize the cancer cells to the chemo. Like in conjunction, they're better than either one of them alone. So that was very influential in doing both of those treatments, like the self-treatment of fasting and the chemotherapy as well. But yes, so far, I ended my treatments in August, and I've had a couple of follow-up appointments, and everything so far is good.
So
hopefully
Karen,
it continues.
you discovered low carbon fasting after your diagnosis, or you started doing that before?
After.
After,
I
okay.
had done low carb over the years, but the fasting I hadn't really paid attention to, and I hadn't been paying.
And your doctors didn't say anything about that kind of nothing about
No.
low carb, nothing about fasting?
They, an objection, you mean, to it?
Either objection or encouraging it or just discussing it?
My oncologist, like nobody mentioned it to me. You could do fasting to help with this because, and I think that's because it's not officially part of the treatment.
Mhm.
So they could be held liable if something happens, you know. And I told him I was doing keto and I was planning to fast to help with the side effects. And I asked him, you know, he said, well, that'll be okay if your nutrition stays good. And I asked him if he had any other patients who had tried that. And he said he could remember one that had fasted and he didn't, I mean, I guess he couldn't tell me too much about it for patient confidentiality. But another thing that I did was I would ask for, I feel like we are all what my endocrinologist called I can't think of the word now, micromanaging our diabetes. We're used to that. And so I micromanaged my cancer treatment. When I went for chemo, they would do labs first, and I would ask for a copy of the labs. And I could see what kind of blood counts were getting low. And then I would look that up and I'd say, now what do I need to eat or take or whatever to fix this problem? So that helped me keep, you know, platelets up, white blood cell, red blood cell, all that stuff in good levels. And at the end of it, I mean, he kept saying, your labs are perfect. Your labs are perfect. But it was because I paid attention to what they were doing. And then I would compensate to help with that.
Interject here, Karen, and add that, you know, Thomas Seyfried, Professor Thomas Seyfried also uses fasting with in his clinic for cancer patients. So extended fast, I'm talking about extended fasts. Wow, what a story, Karen. I'm really happy for you. And I'm happy that, you know, cancer is in remission or disappeared for life. And we can only hope for the best for you.
Yes, thank you.
Michael, any plans for another extended fast?
These days, I don't think so. I'm doing my IF right now, and I'm having good success with that. I know if I start putting on more weight again, I may look at increasing the amount of time. But the way I'm eating now, my diet, my hunger cues are back, my satiety is there with the food I'm eating. The exercise is doing its thing. So I accomplished my goals with the fasting that I did in my diet. So no plans right now.
Same for me.
But it can be done. It can be done.
Yes, I mean, we can never say never because, you know, it's something we can do. We now know because we've tried it. We know that we can do it safely. So we have the confidence. I primarily do it for insulin sensitivity. So to regain when I notice that, you know, I've overindulged in cheese, you know, for a few days around Christmas time, for example, it's really like, right? There are always the nut butters and almond flour cakes and whatever. And it's okay to be, you know, normal and, you know, to if you want to, of course, but then there are consequences to it. And then I noticed these days that you know, sort of a 2 30-hour fast or 32-hour fast in the week seem to have, at least for me, the same effect in terms of insulin sensitivity as a 5-day fast. So I don't need a 5-day fast to regain my insulin sensitivity. I can just fast for 42 hours and I'm good to go. So that's why I have no intentions just now to do another extended fast. But if I ever feel like I have to, I'll benefit from it. Of course, I will.
And it's important to note for type 1s out there to know that it's another tool in your tool belt that you can use, that's
Mhm.
not really talked about a lot. And I think that's why this episode here is important to get up to
Yeah.
the viewers. You know, there's pumps that you can use to manage. There's fasting. There's diet. There's types of insulin. And this is just something else. You know, fasting isn't going to solve everything with your diabetes, but it's just something else that's there that you know, you can look into.
Yeah.
Following up
It
from
does definitely help.
that, Michael, it doesn't solve everything, but it's a great tool, especially bearing in mind that a lot of type 1 diabetics have so many damaged nerves, and
Mhm.
including their gut lining, for example. So a lot of apparently intestinal or gastrointestinal issues happen among diabetics. So bearing that in mind, fasting is a great tool to heal your gut. I know that from personal experience after having been on a high carb diet for 2 decades. I've damaged my gut. So so I feel better when I fast. So that's another reason I personally fast. But again, I don't need to do a very long fast. Usually 32 hours seem to do the trick for me. One thing
Yeah, a lot of healing from fasting, which is good. We didn't mention that very much, but it does heal a lot of the damaged cells, which is a really good benefit for diabetics.
Exactly. One thing we didn't mention, and that's the last thing I would like us to discuss before I wrap this up, ketones. Who'd like to start? Did you actually check your ketones during the fast, and how high did you go?
Yeah,
I haven't.
You go ahead, Karen. Oh, I was religious about testing my ketones. I wasted so much money testing my ketones. That the highest that I got to, I think, was probably 7.5 millimole with my blood meter. But then when I stopped fasting, then I did more research. Like I read Marty's book, and I just like, you know what? There's really nothing. My goal isn't high ketones. My goal is to lose weight, feel satiated, and now to build muscle. So I kind of snapped out of the checking ketone levels, but if you do fasting and eat a high fat keto diet for other medical reasons, like there's other indicated reasons like epilepsy, some other ones that escape my mind now, then you should be shooting for the higher ketone levels, absolutely. And Finney and Volek did a lot of research with the optimal ketogenic range. I think Marty did some tackling of that. It's 0.5 to 1.5 for an optimal range for endurance athletes, I think, who do cyclists. But to answer your question, Nayiri, yes, I did check religiously every day, multiple times a day, and I'd chart it out. And what it showed was the longer I fasted, the higher my ketones got, and then I ate again, and my ketones got lower, and that's it. And that's to be expected eating a very low carbohydrate diet and fasting. So.
That does remind me, we didn't talk about salt, potassium, magnesium. Did you use any of that in your 7-day fast, your longer fasts? How did you do that?
I only use salt.
Yeah.
Only salt.
Just salt.
Yeah, I use magnesium glycinate and salt, pink salt.
Okay.
So.
I use magnesium glycinate also. It's important that you use magnesium glycinate, not the magnesium oxide.
Yes.
To pay attention to that.
Yes, there's different types of magnesium that you can take, and glycinate seems to be the best. I take that before bed because it helps with relaxation.
Same as me, but during my fast I didn't take that, so I stopped. In fact, I take vitamin D3 as well regularly. We don't see much sunshine here, but but I stopped that too. So I just didn't want any sort of stomach upset. Not that it would have mattered, but it may have mattered. I don't know. So I stopped all my vitamins, but I did take Himalayan salt, plenty of water, and that stopped the coldness in the fingertips, especially like, because when first couple of days, first time I did it, like the second day, I was freezing, like woolen socks and things, nothing could work. And then I realized that's it, it's the salt. And then I was like shaking. I started shaking a little bit, like dizzy. I thought that's it, I need salt. And then that it worked like magic, like instant. It's so instant. Effect is so instant. That's mind-blowing. It's so instant.
Yeah.
It's because when you lower your insulin levels that low, your body gets rid of all the excess fluid.
Yes.
And then you need the salt to stay hydrated. So it's kind of you wouldn't think to eat salt to stay hydrated, but it's true, especially on a very low carbohydrate diet. So that's a good point, Karen. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. I got a really bad muscle cramp one time and my leg was sore for days, like just because I hadn't gotten enough salt that day. But it's almost instant relief if you get a muscle cramp, if you take some salt, like a quarter teaspoon at a time, maybe half a teaspoon a day, not too much, but yeah.
There seems to be a natural sort of, as if there is a sort of your body, your taste buds rather regulate it so naturally. So I usually start off with a small sort of pinch of salt and put it in my mouth, and then take another pinch, and I go, yuck. If it's a yuck thing, then that's it. I don't need any more. I've just had the salt that I needed. It's amazing actually, because you can't do that with sugar, for example, right? You can't self-regulate your sugar. Your body seems to self-regulate its salt needs. Dr. Kemberry talks about this quite often too. So coming back to ketones, I actually measure during the fast. I don't regularly like Marty's. I mean, you can't just uselessly be chasing ketones, because the more keto adapted you are, the lower your ketones are going to be. So the goal isn't to achieve high ketones, but during the extended fast, I did check my ketones regularly. But it was surprising because the 90-hour fast and the 100-hour fast, you would think that I would have similar levels of ketones. No, they were completely different, but I did go up to, I think the highest was either 5 or 6, which
did
actually
you feel sick at all, Nayiri?
Millimoles, yeah, same measurements, yeah.
But did you feel ill when your ketones got to that level?
No, I didn't, but I was hungry. My ketones, the higher the ketones, the more hungry I felt, and I haven't been able to quite understand why, because you would think that with abundance of ketones, the last thing I would feel is like hunger for food. But maybe because it was day 5 anyway. Maybe it's not related. Hunger isn't probably related to
Nayiri,
ketones.
have you heard it's talked about a lot with why type 1s shouldn't fast is because their ketones will go up and they'll get something called EDKA, or euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis.
I've heard of that, and that's why I checked. That's another reason why I kept checking my ketones. And as I said, the highest was 5 or 6. I think the cutoff point for that condition is is 6 millimoles. So fortunately, I didn't go above 6, but I don't understand it enough. But fortunately, I didn't go above 6. So
yeah,
I was just
a good person to ask would be Allison, if you know Allison from the low carb groups. She's a nurse, and she's seen very, very, very rarely EDKA patients. She says that it's happened very rarely, but only when they were fasting. So that's just something else to potentially keep an eye on. But if you don't feel well while you're fasting, Jason Fung talks about this a lot, then just end the fast and start one over again. Just eat a meal. Your ketone levels will come back down like normal. To start over again. That's one of the good things about fasting, is that it's so flexible, and it accommodates to your schedule. And if you need to end early, so be it. You just start another one in a couple days. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And Karen, you did that, didn't you? When I was following your fasting progress in the group, and you were posting regularly. Yeah. And then at one point you said, that's it. I can't reach my goal. I'm ending it today.
Yeah. It was just, I was feeling funny. Not really nauseous, just a little dizzy, or a little too dizzy too many times, when it's several times. And I had been taking salts and things like that. So I thought it must be something else. It probably would. I have been curious about the ketones. I need to get myself one of the finger sticker ketone checkers. Yeah.
Oh, what
But
other,
yeah.
Michael, you mentioned what I felt with higher ketones. Apart from the hunger I was feeling, I think, nauseous, quite nauseous, as you said. So
That's what I felt too. When I got to the high sevens, I didn't feel well at all. And that's when I decided to break my fast, and I ate some meat, and I felt my ketones got back down to like 1.0, and I felt fine again. So.
And breaking the extended fast, did you have to break it sort of with small portions of food, or did you just go into it and you were fine?
At first, I would do the, like a little bit of broth, maybe like a little tiny bit of whatever. But by the end, I was just eating. After a long fast, I go to Wendy's, which is a local fast food hamburger place, and I get like 9 cheeseburgers or something like that. I kind of overdo it. Just because, hey, I've earned this, and I love cheeseburgers, but yeah,
Without the buns.
Without the buns, that's correct. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, what a fascinating discussion. Any last thoughts, any ideas, any insights that we left out, Karen?
I enjoyed the discussion. Hopefully it'll be a help to a lot of people, because it's very hard to find information for type 2 to fast and do keto.
Michael?
Yeah, I would just say I agree. It was a very good discussion. I would just say, if you're out there and you're curious about this, not just fasting, but diabetes management or health in general, be sure to be a self-advocate. Don't rely on others to know what's good for you, or do your own research. Lean on the diabetes community online, especially the low carb community. I'm kind of biased in that regard, but be a self-advocate, and don't be afraid to experiment to try and better yourself.
And be safe.
And be safe, and use all the tools at your disposal to get healthy.
I can't thank you both enough for your time today. It was difficult to organize the different time zones, but I'm so grateful you were able to make it. I'm very appreciative.
Thanks for asking
so much,
us.
Nayiri. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.